The sight of 20 alien slave girls, their eyes wide with disbelief, greeted Peter Reyes as he smashed the control panel of their holding cells. Alarms blared through the dimly lit underground bunker on Romulus, but the human soldier remained focused on his unexpected rescue mission. Peter's fingers flew across the alien terminal, decrypting files that revealed the horrifying truth of the Romulan breeding program. His original mission to gather intelligence on military capabilities paled in comparison to the atrocity before him. As the last force field flickered out, Peter locked eyes with Uma, a striking Romulan-Orion hybrid. Her emerald skin glistened in the low light, and her violet eyes bored into him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "I'm here to get you out," Peter said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Follow me if you want to live." The freed slaves hesitated, their bodies tense with suspicion. They had never encountered a human before, and years of Romulan cruelty had taught them to distrust all other species. Peter's heart raced as he heard the approaching footsteps of Romulan security forces. "We don't have time for this," he hissed, grabbing Uma's hand. "Now or never." Uma's touch seemed to break the spell. She nodded to the others, and soon Peter found himself leading a group of 20 alien women through maintenance tunnels. The narrow passageways echoed with their hurried footsteps and ragged breathing. As they navigated the labyrinth of corridors, Uma fell into step beside Peter. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter's jaw clenched. "Because it's right. No one deserves to be enslaved." Uma's eyes widened at his words. As they paused at an intersection, she leaned closer. "I have information," she said, "about Romulan military strategies, weaknesses. I overheard things while serving the officers." Peter's heart raced at the implications. This intelligence could turn the tide of the Earth-Romulan war. He nodded grimly. "We'll get that information to Earth, I promise." As they neared the extraction point, reality crashed down on Peter. His small stealth ship couldn't accommodate all 20 freed slaves. The sound of Romulan patrols grew louder, and Peter made a split-second decision. "Listen up," he said, turning to the group. "My ship's at the end of this tunnel. It'll take you to safety, but I can't go with you. I'll find another way off-planet." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the group. Uma stepped forward, her violet eyes blazing with determination. "I'm staying with you," she declared. Peter opened his mouth to argue, but the look on Uma's face stopped him. He nodded, then quickly instructed the others on how to operate the ship. As the freed slaves disappeared into the darkness, Peter turned to Uma. "We need to move," he said, acutely aware of her proximity, "and find a way to transmit your intelligence to Earth." Uma nodded, her hand brushing against his. Peter felt a jolt of electricity at the contact, and he struggled to focus on the task at hand. As they set off into the hostile Romulan territory, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irrevocably changed. With Uma by his side, he faced an uncertain future filled with danger, cultural misunderstandings, and the growing attraction between them. But for now, survival was their primary concern as they raced against time to evade capture and complete their vital mission. Peter and Uma raced through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. The sound of pursuing Romulan forces grew fainter as they navigated the complex maze of the underground facility. Peter's mind raced, formulating a plan as they ran. "This way," he whispered, guiding Uma down a narrow maintenance shaft. The tight space forced them to move single file, their bodies brushing against each other in the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into the cool night air of Romulus. Uma gasped, her violet eyes widening as she took in the alien landscape. Towering, crystalline structures glowed faintly in the distance, casting an eerie light across the barren terrain. Peter quickly scanned their surroundings, spotting an abandoned mining outpost nestled against a nearby hillside. "There," he said, pointing. "We can lay low there for a while." They made their way across the rocky ground, keeping to the shadows. Uma moved with surprising agility, her years of captivity having honed her ability to move silently. As they approached the outpost, Peter raised a hand, signaling her to stop. He drew his phase pistol and cautiously entered the dilapidated structure. Moments later, he reappeared. "All clear, come on in." The interior of the outpost was a single room filled with outdated mining equipment and discarded personal effects. A thick layer of dust covered everything, indicating it had been abandoned for some time. Peter secured the entrance while Uma explored their temporary shelter. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter ran a hand through his hair, the full weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. "We need to find a way to transmit your intelligence to Earth," he said. "But first, we need to catch our breath and come up with a plan." Uma nodded, then hesitated. I may be able to help with that," she said. "During my time serving the officers, I learned much about Romulan security protocols and patrol patterns. There's a communications hub not far from here. We might be able to use it to send a message to your people." Peter's eyes widened. "Uma, that's brilliant, but it'll be incredibly dangerous." "I know," she replied, her chin lifting slightly. "But I want to help. You risked everything to save us. Let me do this." Peter studied her face, noting the commitment in her eyes. He nodded slowly. "All right. We'll need to prepare, though. I can teach you some basic self-defense and how to use earth weapons. It might come in handy." Over the next few hours, Peter and Uma worked together in the confined space of the outpost. He showed her how to handle a phase pistol, guiding her hands as she learned to aim and fire. Their bodies pressed close as he demonstrated hand-to-hand combat techniques, each touch sending a jolt of electricity through them both. As dawn approached, they finalized their plan to infiltrate the communications hub. Peter couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for Uma's quick thinking and adaptability. She had absorbed his lessons with remarkable speed, her natural grace translating well to combat movements. Their planning was interrupted by the distant sound of voices. Peter peered out of a cracked window, his heart sinking as he spotted a Romulan patrol in the distance. "They're closing in," he whispered. "We need to move. Now." They slipped out of the outpost, keeping low as they made their way into the alien wilderness beyond. The landscape was unlike anything Peter had ever seen. Bizarre flora with iridescent leaves and towering fungi that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Uma led the way, her intimate knowledge of Romulan terrain proving invaluable. As they scaled a steep cliff face, Peter's hand slipped on a loose rock. Uma reacted instantly, grabbing his wrist and pulling him to safety. They found themselves pressed against each other, breathing heavily from the near miss. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the world around them faded away. The moment was shattered by an inhuman screech. Peter spun around, his blood running cold at the sight before them. A pack of creatures that looked like a nightmarish fusion of wolves and oversized insects emerged from the alien foliage, their mandibles clicking hungrily. "Run!" Peter shouted, pushing Uma ahead of him. They sprinted through the dense undergrowth, the creatures in hot pursuit. Peter fired his phase pistol behind them, the energy bolts illuminating the bizarre landscape in brief flashes. Uma suddenly stumbled, crying out in pain. Without hesitation, Peter scooped her up and continued running. He spotted a narrow crevice in a nearby rock formation and made a beeline for it. They squeezed through just as the lead creature lunged, its pincers snapping shut inches from Peter's leg. In the safety of the crevice, Peter set Uma down gently. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands running over her body, checking for injuries. Uma nodded, her breath coming in short gasps. "I think so. Just twisted my ankle." Their eyes met again, and this time, neither looked away. The adrenaline of their escape, combined with the intimacy of their close quarters, proved too much to resist. Peter leaned in, his lips meeting Uma's in a passionate, if somewhat clumsy, kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Uma's violet eyes were wide with wonder and a hint of confusion. "I've never," she started, then trailed off. Peter opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of Romulan voices in the distance silenced him. Reality came crashing back down around them. They couldn't stay here, they needed to keep moving. "We need to split up," Peter said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "I'll create a diversion, draw them away. You head for the communications hub." Uma's grip on his arm tightened. "No, I can't leave you." "You have to," Peter interrupted. The information you have could turn the tide of the war. It's bigger than just us. Uma nodded reluctantly. As Peter turned to go, she pulled him back, initiating another kiss. This one was deeper, more confident, filled with unspoken emotions and the weight of their shared experiences. "Be careful," she whispered as they parted. Peter nodded, his throat tight. "We'll meet at the rendezvous point in 24 hours. Don't be late." With a final glance, they went their separate ways, Peter towards the Romulan search parties, and Uma towards the heavily guarded communications hub. As the alien sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bizarre landscape, both human and hybrid faced their own set of challenges, united in purpose, but separated by circumstance. Peter's mind raced as he formulated a plan to outmaneuver the Romulan forces. He needed to create enough chaos to keep them occupied without getting caught himself. As he moved through the alien terrain, he couldn't shake the memory of Uma's kiss, the feel of her skin against his. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. Survival first, he told himself. Everything else would have to wait. Wait. Everything else would have to wait. As the alien sun crested the horizon, bathing the bizarre landscape in an otherworldly glow, Uma approached the Romulan communications hub. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained a mask of calm commitment. The stolen Romulan uniform felt stiff and uncomfortable against her emerald skin, but it served its purpose, concealing her true identity as she moved with practiced confidence towards the facility's entrance. Uma's mind raced, recalling every detail of Romulan security protocols she had gleaned during her years of captivity. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. With fluid movements that belied her inner tension, she navigated the outer perimeter defenses, her intimate knowledge of Romulan systems proving invaluable. As Uma infiltrated the hub, Peter was engaged in a dangerous game of cat and mouse with Romulan search parties. He darted through the alien terrain, setting up crude traps using the environment to his advantage. Poisonous flora became tripwires, while unstable rock formations were transformed into deadfalls. Each time the Romulans seemed to close in, Peter would slip away, leaving them tangled in vines or trapped in sudden sinkholes. Inside the communications facility, Uma's confidence wavered as she faced an unexpected obstacle. The secure terminal required a level of clearance she didn't possess. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she quickly weighed her options. Drawing upon years of observation, she straightened her posture and affected the haughty demeanor of a Romulan officer. "You there?" she barked at a nearby technician, her voice dripping with practiced disdain. "This terminal is malfunctioning. Fix it immediately." The technician hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the apparent authority in Uma's voice. As he wavered, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. The floor shook with the force of a distant explosion, and chaos erupted around them. Miles away, Peter stood before a hidden Romulan weapons cache, his hands steady as he rigged the last of the explosives. The detonation rocked the landscape, sending plumes of alien dust and debris into the air. Without pausing to admire his handiwork, Peter sprinted away, using the confusion to break free from his pursuers and make his way towards the rendezvous point. Back at the hub, Uma seized the moment of confusion to access the terminal. Her fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls as she initiated the transmission of vital intelligence to Earth. Each second felt like an eternity as the data streamed across subspace, carrying with it the potential to turn the tide of the war. As Uma completed the transmission and turned to leave, she found herself face to face with a high-ranking Romulan commander. His eyes widened in recognition, and Uma knew her disguise had failed. Without hesitation, she fell into a fighting stance, Peter's lessons flooding back to her. The commander lunged, but Uma was ready. She sidestepped his attack, using his momentum against him. Her elbow connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As he stumbled, Uma struck again, her movements a fluid blend of desperation and newfound skill. The commander crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Uma fled the facility, her heart racing as she navigated the chaotic halls. Outside, she blended into the crowds of panicked Romulans, her stolen uniform now a lifeline as she made her way towards the rendezvous point. Peter arrived first, his body aching from exertion and minor injuries sustained during his evasion. He scanned the alien horizon anxiously, every muscle tense as he waited for Uma. When she finally appeared, relief washed over him like a physical force. "You made it," he breathed, pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. "The transmission was successful," Uma reported, her violet eyes shining with triumph. "And you? The explosion?" Peter nodded, a grim smile playing at his lips. "Weapons cache. Should keep them busy for a while." Their moment of victory was short-lived as the reality of their situation set in. The planet was on high alert, and Romulan forces were closing in from all directions. They needed a way off Romulus, and fast. As they caught their breath, a garbled transmission came through on Peter's stolen Romulan communicator. Uma listened intently, her eyes widening as she translated. "They're evacuating high-ranking officials from the spaceport," she said, hope creeping into her voice. "It might be our only chance." Peter nodded, his mind already racing through potential infiltration strategies. "It's risky, but we're out of options. Let's move." As they set out towards the spaceport, the constant threat of discovery and the intensity of their shared ordeal pushed Peter and Uma closer together. Their hands brushed as they moved through the alien underbrush, each touch sending sparks of electricity through their bodies. The air between them grew thick with unspoken words and suppressed desires. Finally, unable to resist any longer, they came together in a passionate embrace. Peter's lips found Uma's, and for a moment the danger faded away. They clung to each other, their bodies pressed close, finding solace and connection amidst the chaos. But reality intruded all too soon. The distant sound of Romulan patrols jolted them back to the present. With great reluctance, they separated, their eyes locked in a silent promise to explore these feelings further if they survived. Refocused on their mission, Peter and Uma approached the outskirts of the spaceport. Romulan ships of various sizes filled the launch bays, crews scrambling to prepare for emergency departures. Security was tight, but the general confusion worked in their favor. "There," Peter whispered, pointing to a sleek, mid-sized vessel. "Looks like a personal transport. Minimal crew, easier to infiltrate." Uma nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the ship's access points. "I can get us past the initial security checkpoints, but once we're inside—" "We'll improvise," Peter finished, squeezing her hand reassuringly. As they prepared to make their final push for freedom, the weight of their mission pressed down upon them. The fate of Earth, the success of their daring escape, and the possibility of a future together all hung in the balance. With Romulan forces closing in and time running out, Peter and Uma exchanged one last determined look before plunging into the controlled chaos of the spaceport, ready to fight for their lives and their future. Future together all hung in the balance. With Romulan forces closing in and time running out, Peter and Uma exchanged one last determined look before plunging into the controlled chaos of the spaceport, ready to fight for their lives and their freedom. The darkness of the Romulan night cloaked their movements as they carefully navigated through the bustling spaceport. Uma's intimate knowledge of Romulan protocols proved invaluable as they approached each security checkpoint. With practiced ease, she mimicked the imperious bearing of a high-ranking officer, while Peter's expert stealth training allowed him to blend seamlessly into the shadows. As they weaved through the throngs of panicked Romulans, Peter's eyes darted from ship to ship, searching for their best chance of escape. Suddenly he spotted it, a sleek, small courier vessel preparing for departure. "There," he whispered, his breath hot against Uma's ear. "That's our ticket out of here." They approached the ship with deliberate caution, every step measured and precise. Just as they reached the access ramp, a shout rang out behind them. Peter whirled around to see a Romulan guard advancing, his hand reaching for his disruptor. Without hesitation, Peter launched himself at the guard. Their bodies collided with a dull thud, and they tumbled to the ground. The guard was strong, his Romulan physiology giving him a clear advantage. But Peter was quick, fueled by desperation and years of combat training. As they grappled on the hard tarmac, Uma sprinted to the ship's exterior control panel. Her fingers flew over the alien interface, bypassing security protocols and overriding system after system. She worked with frantic precision, acutely aware of the struggle happening mere feet away. Peter managed to pin the guard's arms, but the Romulan's superior strength was starting to overpower him. Gritting his teeth, Peter drove his forehead into the guard's nose. The sickening crunch was followed by a spray of green blood. The guard's grip loosened just enough for Peter to slam his elbow into the Romulan's temple, finally rendering him unconscious. Panting heavily, Peter scrambled to his feet and joined Uma at the ship's entrance. "We're in," she announced, the airlock hissing open. They rushed inside, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The interior was compact but well-appointed, clearly designed for a high-ranking official. As they made their way to the cockpit, they found themselves face-to-face with a startled Romulan officer. "What is the meaning of—" Commander Vex's indignant query was cut short as Peter lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. Uma didn't hesitate. She leapt into the pilot's seat, her hands dancing across the controls as she initiated the launch sequence. The ship hummed to life beneath them, the deck plates vibrating with building power. Behind her, Peter and Vex were locked in a fierce struggle. The Romulan commander's fist connected with Peter's jaw, sending him reeling, but Peter recovered quickly, using his momentum to drive his shoulder into Vex's midsection. "Uma!" Peter shouted, his voice strained. "Get us out of here!" She nodded, her focus absolute as she guided the ship off the landing pad. The vessel rose smoothly, but their momentary triumph was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the spaceport as Romulan security became aware of the hijacking. Ground-based weapons roared to life, filling the air with sizzling bolts of energy. Uma banked hard, narrowly avoiding the barrage, but a lucky shot clipped one of their engines. The ship lurched violently, nearly throwing Peter and Vex off their feet. "I need you up here," Uma called out, her hands struggling to maintain control of the wounded vessel. With a final, decisive blow, Peter knocked Vex unconscious. He quickly bound the Romulan's hands and feet before rushing to take the co-pilot's seat. "Damage report?" he asked, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar readouts. Uma's face was grim. "We've lost power to the starboard engine. I'm rerouting systems, but we're going to be limping." Peter nodded, taking control of the helm. "Then let's make this count." He pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through the storm of weapons fire as they climbed higher into the atmosphere. Uma worked feverishly beside him, her emerald fingers a blur as she fought to keep their systems online. As they broke through the cloud cover, a new threat loomed before them. A blockade of Romulan warbirds hung in low orbit, their weapons primed and ready. "Any ideas?" Peter asked, his voice tight with tension. Uma's eyes narrowed as she studied the formation. "Their ventral shielding is weaker. If we can get under them—" Peter didn't need to hear more. He sent their small ship into a nosedive, plummeting back towards the planet's surface. The warbirds opened fire, but Peter's evasive maneuvers kept them just ahead of the deadly beams. At the last possible moment, he pulled up, skimming the treetops of Romulus's alien forests. The canopy of bizarre vegetation rushed by in a blur as Peter threaded their vessel through gaps in the blockade's coverage. Uma clung to her seat, her heart pounding as Peter executed a series of high-risk maneuvers. Their bodies pressed together with each sharp turn, the close quarters of the cockpit amplifying their awareness of each other. As they cleared the last of the warbirds, a triumphant grin spread across Peter's face. But their celebration was cut short by a violent tremor that shook the entire ship. "What was that?" Peter demanded, fighting to keep them on course. Uma's fingers flew over the diagnostic screens. "It's Vex. He's trying to sabotage the warp drive." Without a word, Peter engaged the autopilot and sprinted towards the engine room. Uma watched him go, her chest tight with worry. She turned back to the controls, knowing that keeping them airborne was now entirely up to her. In the cramped confines of the engine room, Peter found Vex free of his restraints and hunched over an open panel. The Romulan commander spun to face him, his eyes blazing with fury. "You will not escape Romulan justice," Vex snarled, launching himself at Peter. The two men collided in a tangle of limbs, crashing into delicate equipment. Vex's superior strength gave him the upper hand, pinning Peter against a bulkhead. But Peter had survived countless battles against overwhelming odds, and he wasn't about to let this be his last. Using the Romulan's momentum against him, Peter twisted, driving his knee into Vex's solar plexus. As the commander's grip loosened, Peter broke free and grabbed a broken piece of piping. He swung it in a wide arc, connecting solidly with Vex's temple. The Romulan crumpled to the floor, finally subdued. Peter quickly checked the warp drive, relieved to find that Vex hadn't managed to do any serious damage. He secured the commander once more, this time ensuring there would be no second escape attempt. Returning to the cockpit, Peter found Uma gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. Through the view screen, he could see a massive field of asteroids looming before them. "Romulan patrols are right behind us," Uma reported, her voice strained. "I had to plot a course through the asteroid field to lose them, but I can't." Peter slid back into the pilot seat. "I've got this. You focus on getting our systems back to full power." As Peter guided their battered ship through the treacherous field of space debris, Uma worked tirelessly to repair the damage from their escape. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, rerouting power and bypassing damaged circuits. A massive asteroid loomed directly in their path. Peter banked hard to port, the ship's hull scraping against the rock with a teeth-rattling screech. Uma was thrown against him, her body pressed firmly against his side. For a moment, despite the chaos around them, both were acutely aware of the contact. Their eyes met briefly, a spark of electricity passing between them. But the blaring of proximity alarms quickly shattered the moment. Peter refocused on navigating the asteroid field, while Uma returned to her repairs with renewed commitment. Together they worked in perfect synchronization, their recent ordeal having forged an unbreakable bond between them. As they finally cleared the last of the asteroids, the immediate danger began to pass. The adrenaline that had been sustaining them started to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Peter engaged the autopilot, plotting a course that would take them further from Romulan space. Uma slumped in her seat, the events of the past day catching up with her all at once. "We did it," she murmured, her violet eyes heavy with fatigue. Peter nodded, feeling the weight of their ordeal settling onto his shoulders. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've bought ourselves some time." They retreated to the small crew quarters, both acutely aware of how long it had been since they'd last slept or eaten. As they tended to each other's wounds from the escape, their touches lingered longer than strictly necessary. The tension between them, born of shared danger and growing attraction, seemed to fill the small space. Uma's hand rested on Peter's chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and desire. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. Peter responded immediately, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. All the pent-up emotion and attraction they'd been suppressing came rushing to the surface. For a moment, the universe narrowed to just the two of them, lost in each other's embrace. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, nearly throwing them off their feet. A series of alarms began blaring throughout the vessel. Peter and Uma reluctantly separated, both breathless and flushed. "We'd better check that out," Peter said, his voice husky. Uma nodded, trying to regain her composure. "Yes, we should." As they made their way back to the cockpit, the reality of their situation came crashing back. They were still fugitives in a stolen Romulan ship, pursued by one of the most powerful forces in the quadrant. Their journey was far from finished. Peter took the pilot's seat, his hands moving swiftly over the controls as he assessed their situation. "Looks like the damage from our escape is worse than we thought. We need to find somewhere to make repairs." Uma's brow furrowed in concentration. "I might know a place. There's a neutral trading outpost not far from here. It's not the most reputable establishment, but they don't ask questions." Peter considered their options. A lawless outpost came with its own set of dangers, but they were running out of choices. "All right," he said finally, "set a course. We'll deal with whatever we find there when we arrive." As Uma input the coordinates, Peter couldn't help but steal glances at her. Their kiss had changed things between them, adding another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. But as they worked together to keep their damaged ship on course, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The stars streaked by outside the view screen as their stolen vessel limped towards the trading outpost. Peter and Uma sat side by side, each lost in their own thoughts, but acutely aware of the other's presence. The immediate danger had passed, but both knew that their adventure was just the beginning. New challenges awaited them at the outpost, and beyond that, the long journey to Earth still lay ahead. As they traveled, Peter began to tell Uma more about his home planet. He described the varied landscapes, the bustling cities, and the rich tapestry of cultures that made up Earth society. Uma listened with rapt attention, her violet eyes wide with wonder as she tried to imagine a world so different from the rigid, militaristic society she had known on Romulus. In turn, Uma opened up about her experiences as a hybrid in Romulan society. She spoke of the discrimination she had faced, the constant struggle to prove her worth, and the loneliness of never truly belonging. Peter found himself moved by her resilience and strength, his admiration for her growing with each passing moment. As they shared their stories, the tension between them continued to simmer. Their hands would brush as they worked on the ship's systems, sending sparks of electricity through their bodies. Stolen glances and lingering touches became more frequent, the close quarters of the ship amplifying their growing attraction. But amidst the undercurrent of desire, a deeper connection was forming. They found common ground in their experiences as outsiders, Peter as a human in Romulan space, and Uma as a hybrid in a society that valued racial purity. Their shared ordeal had forged a bond of trust and understanding that went beyond mere physical attraction. As they approached the trading outpost, Peter and Uma began to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. They knew they would need to navigate a dangerous and unpredictable environment while keeping their identities secret. The fate of their mission, their budding relationship, and potentially the entire Earth-Romulan conflict hung in the balance. "We'll need to be careful," Peter said, his voice low and serious. "This isn't the kind of place where we can afford to let our guard down." Uma nodded, her expression determined. "I know, but we've made it this far together. Whatever we face in there, we'll handle it." As the outpost grew larger in their view screen, a haphazard collection of structures floating in the void of space, Peter and Uma exchanged a look of purpose. They had survived Romulan captivity, a daring escape, and a harrowing space battle. Now they were about to plunge into a new kind of danger, one where the lines between ally and enemy were blurred, and where one wrong move could spell disaster. The ship's comm system crackled to life, a gruff voice demanding their identification and purpose. As Uma prepared to respond with their cover story, Peter's hand found hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. As Uma prepared to respond with their cover story, Peter's hand found hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. "Nebula's edge control. This is the trader vessel, Stardust," Uma said, her voice steady despite the tension coursing through her. "Requesting permission to dock for repairs and resupply." There was a moment of crackling silence before the gruff voice replied, "Stardust, you're cleared for docking bay 17. Keep your weapons systems powered down and prepare for customs inspection." Peter guided their battered ship towards the sprawling structure of Nebula's edge. The trading outpost was a haphazard collection of modules and repurposed vessels, all fused together in a chaotic tangle of metal and light. As they approached, Peter could see the constant flow of ships coming and going, ranging from sleek luxury yachts to patchwork freighters held together by little more than hope and welding. "Remember," Peter said softly as they maneuvered into the designated docking bay, "we're just a couple of down-on-our-luck traders looking to get back on our feet. Nothing more." Uma nodded, her violet eyes scanning the bay as the docking clamps engaged. "I understand. We should be careful with our Romulan technology. It could draw unwanted attention." As the airlock cycled, Peter and Uma took a deep breath, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. The door hissed open, revealing the bustling interior of Nebula's edge. The contrast with the sterile corridors of the Romulan ship was immediate and jarring. The air was thick with a mixture of alien scents, spices, machinery oil, and less identifiable odors. The cacophony of 100 different languages filled their ears, punctuated by the clanging of tools and the occasional raised voice. Peter and Uma stepped out, their eyes darting around as they took in their surroundings. The docking bay opened onto a wide promenade lined with shops and stalls. Beings of every conceivable species bustled past, some giving the newcomers curious glances. "We need to find a parts dealer," Peter murmured, keeping his voice low. "Preferably someone who won't ask too many questions." They made their way through the crowd, Uma's unique features drawing more than a few appreciative looks. Peter felt a twinge of possessiveness, but he pushed it aside, focusing on their mission. As they turned down a narrower corridor, they came across a cluttered shop front. A sign in multiple languages advertised Grok's Galactic Salvage. Behind a counter piled high with mechanical odds and ends stood a gruff-looking Tellarite, his porcine features set in a permanent scowl. "What do you want?" Grok grunted as they approached. Peter stepped forward, adopting the easy manner of a seasoned trader. "We're looking for some specialized parts. Our ship took some damage and we need to get back in business." Grok's small eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Specialized, eh? That usually means expensive. What have you got to trade?" Uma produced a small device from her pocket, a piece of Romulan technology they had agreed to part with. "Would something like this interest you?" The Tellarite's eyes widened, his demeanor instantly changing. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice a mix of excitement and wariness. "Let's just say we have our sources," Peter replied smoothly. "Do we have a deal?" As they negotiated with Grok, Peter became aware of a group of Orions entering the shop. Their eyes were fixed on Uma, and there was no mistaking the predatory gleam in their gazes. Peter's muscles tensed, ready for action. He could see Uma had noticed the Orions as well, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly into a defensive stance. "We'll take the parts," Peter said quickly, eager to conclude their business and leave. As Grok gathered the components they needed, the lead Orion, a hulking male with intricate tattoos covering his green skin, stepped closer. "Quite an exotic beauty you have there," he said, his voice oily and threatening. "I'm Kraz. Perhaps we could make a deal of our own." Peter moved protectively closer to Uma. "She's not for sale," he growled, his hand inching towards the concealed weapon at his hip. Kraz's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Everything has a price on Nebula's edge." The tension in the shop rose palpably. Grok, sensing trouble, quickly shoved a crate of parts towards Peter. "Here, take them and go," he said nervously. Peter grabbed the crate, his eyes never leaving Kraz. "Uma, let's move," he said quietly. They backed out of the shop, the Orions following close behind. As they emerged into the crowded corridor, Peter saw more of Kraz's associates converging on them. "Run!" Peter shouted, dropping the crate and grabbing Uma's hand. They sprinted through the winding passageways of Nebula's edge, the angry shouts of the Orion slavers echoing behind them. Peter's military training kicked in as he weaved through the crowd, pulling Uma along with him. A burst of energy weapon fire sizzled past Peter's ear, impacting the wall ahead in a shower of sparks. Screams erupted from the crowd as beings dove for cover. Peter spotted a narrow alleyway and pulled Uma into it. They found themselves in a dimly lit corridor, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. "We're trapped," Uma said, her breath coming in short gasps. Peter's eyes darted around, searching for a way out. He spotted a power conduit running along the wall, and an idea struck him. "Get ready to move," he said, grabbing the conduit with both hands. As the first Orion rounded the corner, Peter ripped the conduit free. Electricity arced wildly, striking the Orion's weapon. The energy pistol exploded in a brilliant flash, sending the slaver staggering backward. Peter and Uma seized the moment, pushing past the stunned Orions and back into the main corridor. They ran blindly, taking turn after turn, descending deeper into the bowels of the station. Suddenly, they burst through a door and found themselves on a balcony overlooking a vast arena. Below, two alien gladiators fought brutally as a roaring crowd cheered them on. "In here," Peter said, pulling Uma into the shadows of the upper level. As they caught their breath, pressed close together in the confined space, Peter became acutely aware of Uma's proximity. Their eyes met, adrenaline and attraction mingling in a potent cocktail. Without thinking, Peter leaned in and kissed her. Uma responded immediately, her lips soft yet insistent against his. For a brief moment, the chaos around them faded away. As they separated, both slightly breathless, Uma's keen hearing picked up a familiar voice. She peered over the railing and saw Kraz entering the arena below, his eyes scanning the crowd. "They're still looking for us," she whispered. Peter nodded, his mind racing. "We need a plan. We can't keep running forever." As they watched the brutal spectacle below, snippets of conversation from nearby spectators reached their ears. A name kept coming up. Zarthos. "Who's Zarthos?" Peter asked quietly. Uma's eyes widened in recognition. "I've heard of him. He's supposed to be the most powerful crime lord on Nebula's edge. They say he has technology that can hide ships from any sensors." Peter considered this information, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. If we could get our hands on that technology, we might have a chance of reaching Earth undetected. Uma looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You want to try and make a deal with Zarthos?" Peter nodded grimly. "It's risky, but it might be our only option." As they prepared to venture deeper into the dangerous heart of Nebula's edge, Peter and Uma knew that their next steps would be crucial. The Orion slavers were still hunting them, and they were about to seek out one of the most dangerous beings in the quadrant. Peter took Uma's hand once more, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Together they slipped out of their hiding place and into the teeming underbelly of the outpost, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Peter and Uma slipped away from the arena, their hearts racing as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Nebula's edge. The roar of the crowd faded behind them, replaced by the hum of machinery and the distant echoes of voices in 100 alien tongues. "We need to find Zarthos," Peter whispered, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow as they moved. "It's our best shot at getting out of here in one piece." Uma nodded, her violet eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. "I've heard rumors about his compound. It's supposed to be near the center of the outpost, heavily guarded." They made their way through dimly lit passageways, ducking into alcoves whenever they heard approaching footsteps. The air grew thicker with the scent of exotic spices and the acrid tang of industrial chemicals. Twice they narrowly avoided patrols of Kraz's Orion slavers, their green skin glinting menacingly in the low light. As they moved deeper into the heart of Nebula's edge, Peter and Uma gathered snippets of information from the denizens of the outpost's underbelly. A one-eyed Ferengi bartender pointed them towards a nondescript corridor. A Nausicaan arms dealer, after some persuasion, revealed the location of a hidden entrance. Finally, they found themselves standing before an imposing durasteel door, unmarked save for a small, pulsing blue light. Uma studied the security panel, her fingers dancing over the alien technology. "I think I can bypass it," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. Peter kept watch, his hand resting on his concealed weapon. After a tense minute, there was a soft click, and the door slid open with a nearly inaudible hiss. They stepped into a darkened antechamber, the air noticeably cooler and cleaner than the rest of the outpost. As their eyes adjusted, they saw a series of force fields shimmering ahead, creating a twisting path through the room. "Careful," Peter warned, eyeing the deadly energy barriers. "One wrong step, and we're vaporized." Uma's keen eyes picked out the pattern. "Follow me," she said, taking Peter's hand. They wove through the maze of force fields, their bodies close as they navigated the narrow safe zones. At the far end of the room, another door slid open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Peter and Uma stepped through, their eyes widening at the sight before them. The room was a blend of opulent luxury and cutting-edge technology. Holographic displays flickered with data streams and star charts. Alien artifacts and treasures from 100 worlds adorned the walls. And at the center of it all, seated on a levitating throne of pulsing energy, was Zarthos. The crime lord was unlike any being Peter or Uma had ever encountered. His skin was pale and translucent, almost glowing in the chamber's soft light. Large, dark eyes regarded them with ancient intelligence and insatiable curiosity. "Welcome," Zarthos said, his voice a melodious whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Few managed to penetrate my defenses. You've piqued my interest." Peter stepped forward, his posture a careful balance of respect and strength. "We've come seeking your help, Zarthos. We need advanced cloaking technology to evade pursuit." Zarthos's eyes narrowed, the darkness within them swirling like galactic vortexes. "And what do you offer in return for such valuable technology?" Uma spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension thrumming through her body. "We have skills and knowledge that could be of use to you. We're willing to undertake a task in exchange for your aid." A smile played across Zarthos's alien features. "A task, you say? How intriguing." He leaned forward, his form seeming to shimmer and shift. "Very well. I have a proposition for you." Zarthos waved a hand, and a holographic image sprang to life between them. It showed a heavily fortified compound filled with weapons and shield generators. "This is the stronghold of the Nausicaan Crimson Blade Syndicate," Zarthos explained. "Within its vault lies an artifact of immense power and value. Bring it to me, and I'll provide you with the cloaking technology you seek." Peter and Uma exchanged a glance, weighing their options. The heist would be incredibly dangerous, but they had few alternatives. "We'll do it," Peter said firmly. Zarthos nodded, seemingly pleased. "Excellent. You'll find temporary quarters prepared for you. Rest, plan, and when you're ready, my agents will provide you with the necessary intelligence and equipment." As they followed a silent, holographic guide to their assigned room, Peter and Uma felt the weight of their new mission settling upon them. The small chamber was sparse but clean, with a single bed and a computer terminal. Uma sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through her hair. "This is insane, Peter. We're about to rob one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the quadrant." Peter joined her, their shoulders touching. The contact sent a familiar spark through them both. "I know," he said softly, "but we've made it this far together. We'll find a way through this, too." Uma turned to face him, her violet eyes meeting his. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Slowly, inexorably, they leaned towards each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. As they parted breathless, Uma rested her forehead against Peter's. "We should focus on the mission," she whispered, even as her body yearned for more. Peter nodded, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her jaw. "You're right, but when this is over—" Uma smiled, a mix of anticipation and perseverance in her eyes. "When this is over, we'll have time to explore everything." With renewed focus, they turned to the computer terminal, beginning to plan their daring heist. As they worked, studying schematics and security protocols, their bodies remained close, drawing strength and comfort from each other's presence. The challenge ahead was immense, but as Peter and Uma prepared to take on the Nausicaan Syndicate, they knew that together they stood a fighting chance. The future was uncertain, fraught with danger, but in this moment they had each other and a glimmer of hope for what lay beyond. Beyond. The weight of their impending mission hung heavy in the air, but for now they had each other and a moment of respite. As Peter and Uma pored over the schematics for the Nausicaan stronghold, a soft chime interrupted their concentration. The holographic guide materialized, its ethereal form flickering in the dim light of their quarters. "Your equipment is ready," it announced in a melodious tone. "Zarthos awaits you in the main chamber." Exchanging a determined look, Peter and Uma followed the guide back to Zarthos's opulent sanctum. The crime lord's translucent form seemed to pulse with anticipation as they entered. "The time has come," Zarthos intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber. "You have been outfitted with the finest stealth technology at my disposal. Use it wisely." A panel slid open, revealing an array of sleek black devices. Peter and Uma quickly equipped themselves, marveling at the lightness and flexibility of the advanced gear. "Remember," Zarthos cautioned, his dark eyes swirling with intensity, "failure is not an option. The artifact you seek is crucial to my plans." With a wave of his hand, a shimmering portal materialized before them. "This will take you directly to the outskirts of the Nausicaan compound. Good hunting." Peter took Uma's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Together they stepped through the portal, their forms dissolving into a cascade of light. They rematerialized on a rocky outcropping overlooking a heavily fortified structure. The Nausicaan stronghold loomed before them, its imposing walls overflowing with weapon emplacements and shield generators. "Looks even more formidable in person," Peter muttered, his eyes scanning for vulnerabilities. Uma activated her stealth suit, her form shimmering before blending seamlessly with the surroundings. Let's move. We have a narrow window before the guard rotation. They made their way down the jagged slope, their enhanced gear allowing them to move with preternatural silence and agility. As they approached the outer perimeter, Uma tapped into the compound's security network using a device provided by Zarthos. "I've got a blind spot," she whispered. 30 seconds. Peter nodded, and they sprinted across the open ground, their hearts pounding in their ears. Just as they reached the wall, a patrol rounded the corner. They pressed themselves flat against the cold metal, hardly daring to breathe as the Nausicaan guards passed within inches of their position. Once the coast was clear, Uma produced a small disc-like object. She placed it against the wall, and it began to emit a low hum. The metal beneath it softened and bubbled, creating a hole large enough for them to slip through. Inside the compound, they navigated a maze of corridors and security checkpoints. Their stealth technology allowed them to pass undetected, but the constant threat of discovery kept them on high alert. Finally, they reached the central vault. Uma's fingers danced across the locking mechanism, her brow furrowed in concentration. With a soft click, the massive door swung open. The vault was a treasure trove of alien artifacts and advanced technology. In the center, atop a pedestal, sat their target, a pulsing, crystalline object that seemed to bend the light around it. "That's it," Peter breathed. "The artifact Zarthos wants." As Uma carefully lifted the artifact from its resting place, an alarm blared through the compound. Red lights flashed, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. "Time to go," Peter said, drawing his weapon. They burst out of the vault, the stolen artifact clutched tightly in Uma's arms. Nausicaan guards converged on their position, energy weapons flaring to life. Peter and Uma weaved through the barrage, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to stay just ahead of the deadly beams. As they neared the exit, a massive Nausicaan blocked their path. Peter engaged him in hand-to-hand combat, his augmented strength matching the alien's brute force. Uma slipped past, using her agility to outmaneuver the other guards. Peter finally managed to overpower his opponent, slamming him into a control panel. Sparks flew, and the compound's shields flickered momentarily. "Now's our chance," Uma called out. They sprinted for the perimeter, energy blasts sizzling the air around them. As they reached the wall, Peter pulled out a gravitic grapple. The device latched onto the top of the barrier, and they were yanked upward just as a volley of shots obliterated the ground where they had stood. Landing hard on the other side, they scrambled to their feet and ran for the rocky outcropping where they had arrived. Behind them, the air filled with the sound of Nausicaan pursuit craft powering up. "We'll never outrun them on foot," Uma panted. Peter's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for an escape route. Suddenly, he spotted a shimmer in the air, the portal they had used to arrive. "There!" he shouted, pointing. They made a final sprint for the portal, the whine of Nausicaan engines growing louder with each passing second. Just as the first shots from the pursuit craft rained down around them, Peter and Uma leapt into the shimmering gateway. They tumbled through, landing in a heap back in Zarthos's chamber. The crime lord's eyes widened at their abrupt return. "You have it?" he demanded. Uma held up the pulsing artifact, its otherworldly glow illuminating her face. Zarthos reached for it eagerly, but Peter stepped between them. "First, our payment," he said firmly. "The cloaking technology you promised." Zarthos regarded them for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. You have proven yourselves worthy of our bargain." As Zarthos turned to retrieve their reward, Peter and Uma exchanged a victorious glance. They had survived the heist, but both knew their true challenge was just beginning. With the cloaking technology in hand, they would need to navigate treacherous space, evade their pursuers, and find their way back to Earth. Little did they know that their journey would take them to places beyond their wildest imagination, starting with a desperate flight through an asteroid field that would test their newfound technology to its limits. Limits. As they cleared the planet's atmosphere, the true scale of the chaos unfolding behind them became apparent. The guardian beast, a colossal biomechanical monstrosity, burst through the planet's surface like a vengeful deity rising from the depths. Its glowing tendrils whipped through the air, pulsing energy cores casting an eerie light across the landscape. The creature's emergence sent shockwaves through the ground, causing massive fissures to spread across the planet's surface. Simultaneously, the sky darkened as Romulan and Nausicaan ships descended, their weapons primed and targeting systems locked onto Peter and Uma's fleeing vessel. Energy blasts erupted from the pursuing ships, filling the air with deadly green and red bolts. Peter's hands flew across the control panel, pushing their ship to its limits. "Hold on tight, Uma," he shouted as he executed a series of evasive maneuvers, narrowly avoiding the barrage of enemy fire. Uma, her fingers dancing across the tactical display, activated their newly acquired cloaking technology. Cloaking engaged, but it won't last long at these speeds. As they climbed higher into the atmosphere, the guardian beast below seemed to take notice of the attacking ships. Its massive form writhed and twisted, tendrils lashing out to grapple with the nearest Romulan vessel. The ship's shields flickered and failed under the onslaught, crumpling like paper in the beast's grip. "It's buying us time," Uma breathed, her eyes wide as she watched the battle unfold beneath them. Peter nodded grimly, pushing their ship harder. "Let's not waste it." They broke through the last wisps of the planet's atmosphere, the inky blackness of space stretching out before them. Behind them, the guardian beast's massive form was visible even from orbit, its battle with the enemy ships creating a light show of explosions and energy discharges. Uma's console beeped urgently. "Peter, I'm detecting a massive energy buildup from the surface. The portal device, it's becoming unstable." Peter's heart made as he maneuvered through the debris field of destroyed ships. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less," Uma replied, her voice tense. They pushed their ship to its limits, racing against time as the energy readings from the planet below reached critical levels. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted from the surface, momentarily overloading their sensors. As their vision cleared, they watched in awe and horror as the planet imploded, collapsing in on itself. The resulting singularity swallowed everything in its path, the pursuing ships, the guardian beast, and the very ground they had stood on mere hours ago. The shockwave hit their ship with the force of a tsunami, sending them tumbling through space. Warning alarms blared as systems overloaded and failed. "Warp drive is offline," Uma shouted over the cacophony of alerts. "We're venting plasma." Peter fought with the controls, struggling to stabilize their trajectory. "Reroute all available power to the shields and life support. We need to find somewhere to set down and make repairs." As the chaos subsided, they found themselves adrift in an unfamiliar sector of space. The stars around them were alien configurations, offering no familiar landmarks to guide them home. Uma ran a quick scan of nearby systems. "There's a habitable planet in the next system over. It's our best chance, but at sub-light speeds, it'll take us weeks to get there." Peter nodded, setting a course for their only hope of survival. As the ship limped towards its destination, he turned to Uma, taking in her emerald skin and violet eyes. Despite the danger they had just escaped, he found himself marveling at her beauty and strength. "We made it," he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. Uma intertwined her fingers with his, a small smile playing across her lips. "We did. Together." As their ship cruised through the vast emptiness of space, Peter and Uma found themselves with nothing but time. The adrenaline of their escape faded, replaced by a quieter, more intimate tension. In the following days, they worked side by side to repair what systems they could, their bodies often brushing against each other in the confined space of the ship. Each touch sent sparks through them, the physical attraction they had been suppressing finally given room to breathe. One night, as they sat together in the cockpit watching the stars streak by, Uma turned to Peter. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly, "for saving me, for believing in me when no one else did." Peter met her gaze, his heart pounding. "You don't need to thank me, Uma. You saved me too, in more ways than you know." Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, years of pent-up emotion finally finding release. As they pulled apart, breathless, Uma smiled. We have weeks until we reach that planet, she whispered. Perhaps it's time we explored everything. Peter grinned, pulling her close. I couldn't agree more. As their ship continued its journey through the stars, Peter and Uma found solace and strength in each other's arms. The challenges ahead were daunting, but together, they felt ready to face whatever the universe might throw at them next.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, I liked the story, and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.